Contemporary researchers have noted in many instances that the content of certain books indicates a unified and complete composition, created according to a calculated plan for a predetermined purpose. One author can change their style, and many of the contradictions pointed out by researchers are imaginary. Even the duplications noted in different places in the book are not real duplications. It's the excessive love of new research methods for text analysis that led most Christian book researchers to ignore the unity of its content and plan, assuming as a certain truth that the book contains a compilation of compositions. The proponents of the documentary hypothesis are divided in their opinions about the origin of certain chapters. Initially, they attributed it to one source, and then the tendency grew to see it as a combination of segments from two sources. There's debate even about how the combination was done, with no consensus among researchers. Usually, these divisions are based on very fine arguments and preconceived opinions without decisive evidence. In fact, several pieces of evidence prove the unity of the chapter. When we understand the chapter in its context, the contradiction is resolved at its root, proving its close connection with the previous chapter and the comparisons in form and content. Attempts have been made to dissect another book into its sources and to discover different layers within it, but it can't be said that these attempts have been particularly successful. The laws of this book join together into a single code with a known order, even if not a strict systematic one, creating much work for German researchers. Inside these laws, there is no trace or remnant of the fragmentation revealed, except that they are dominated by one style and one text. The naturalness or lack thereof of miracles is examined differently in another approach. One researcher distinguishes between the simple and natural approach of one source and the miraculous exaggerations of other sources, each according to its particular inclination. However, this approach leads to artificial and exaggerated interpretation in many details. The story of a certain historical figure is divided into two parts, distinct in their style and purpose. There's full agreement among researchers about the analysis of these two parts. However, a deeper examination of the narrative shows that this elaborate hypothesis of the researchers is built on nothing. When we examine the contradictions, we find that they are of little value or entirely imaginary. Another theory suggests that a certain book was written on individual sheets, each containing exactly 525 letters, but a disaster occurred and the sheets got mixed up, resulting in a disjointed and confused book. One significant researcher identified in this short book of 222 verses the works of 9 authors, including sages, pious men, and heretics, assigning each their part as he saw fit. This exemplifies the absurdity of the source theory, especially from a historical perspective, as there is no continuation of the 3 main sources that supposedly created the Torah in the historical period that followed. Why did later creations focus only on the period before entering the land, with no work representing the period after? The entire approach of pseudonyms, philosophical perspectives, and exemplary order according to a pattern is more fitting for Greek literature, not Hebrew culture. Even when false stories were written in the ancient East, they were not pseudonyms but folk legends passed on with sacred reverence. The common aspect of all these opinions is that they turn the author into a pseudographer, a composition whose author concealed his identity and masqueraded as the great personality of Moses. Such anonymous compositions attributed to famous ancient figures were not common except in the Hellenistic period. The transformation of the creators of the Hebrew Bible into forgers is illogical when everyone knows that the prophets and their disciples were people of truth with pure qualities. There is no book more devoid of bias than the Hebrew Bible, with simple morality that sternly criticizes its people, from the smallest to the greatest, from king to prince to priest to prophet. In every field we accept the general picture presented to us as correct. Archaeologists of a certain period have never been suspected of joining forces to alter and forge history, despite our different appreciation for the integrity of Moses' Dayan compared to Ezra and Nehemiah. Thus, researchers about Nehemiah write, Nehemiah was a great, highly accomplished, righteous, and God-fearing man, wholly devoted in heart and soul to his religion and his people, generous-hearted, and free from personal ambition and pursuit of honor, and also clean from the pursuit of profit common among Persian officials. He was a man of great vigor and strong will, but also a prudent, cautious, and moderate actor. A leader and planner who knew how to inspire his people and instill in them his strength of spirit and dedication. This assessment does not prevent us from thinking that Nehemiah was the head and leader of the return to Zion, who tampered with and forged all the ancient sources and created a fictional Torah given at Mount Sinai. Yet in all other areas, we accept the words of all historians of every nation and language without too much skepticism. Not only do these hypotheses contradict common sense, but researchers have also crossed all boundaries in their attempts to find more and more sources and divisions. Some argue that the measure by which biblical criticism examines the biblical text is too strict, and there is no other text in any field that is examined with such suspicion. Yet we find contradictions in other masterpieces like War and Peace by Tolstoy, but no one claims that the work was written by several authors. In conclusion, the path taken by the proponents of the documentary hypothesis and source criticism does not lead to any serious conclusion, let alone establish historical certainties. The absurdity of the source theory is further highlighted by its lack of historical continuity and the absence of any trace of the supposed great sources that were the thinkers of Judaism and all its great ideas. How were these sources obliterated so thoroughly that there's not even the slightest historical trace of them, leaving the critics to assume their existence as a mere hypothetical basis? The overly exaggerated approach of higher criticism has lost its appeal even to those who deal with it. Researchers themselves, after immense concentration on splitting sources and constant nitpicking, have grown weary of this work, paving the way for a new slogan that comes partly from archaeological discoveries and partly from the recognition that tradition is also a fact to be reckoned with. The dismissive attitude towards all that is accepted, which contained more than a hint of anti-Semitism, began to fade among most researchers. The feeling developed that the traditional text is a certainty, especially when confirmed several times by other documents, and that any proposal for change or omission is doubtful.